Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to look at chapter number 6 in the book The Ego Tunnel by Thomas Metzingers, which leaves us with 3 chapters to go. To start with, I thought I'd remind us, of the overall goal of the book that Metzingers pursues. Well, not only with this book, but with this self-model theory, and that is to basically develop a language that describes conscious thinking. And this language should be grounded in either the structure or the functionality of the brain. So that's what he's trying to do overall. And in this chapter, he explores 2 kinds of neurons, that is, mirror neurons and canonical neurons, and we will look at definitions for each a little bit later on. And what he's basically trying to show is that our sense of self not only comes about or is not only determined by just neural correlations, that are coupled with our own brains and our perceptions of just the world, but that the sense of self or the image of self that we have comes about also via social correlates. Sorry, I'm totally distracted by my dog today because he won't stop panting. It's driving me nuts. Let's hope he's gonna stay quiet. Anyway, so essentially there are layers to our self-model, and some layers require social interaction, which in turn require special types of neurons. Okay, he won't stop panting, so I'm gonna have to put on my headphones. So we're going to go through a bunch of a bunch of statements that I picked out, excerpts that I picked out from the book in order to trace the line of argument in this chapter. Let's start with toddlers do not yet have an autonomous self-model, though probably none of us has a self-model that is truly independent from others. In such small children, we observe an important fact about the nature of our own phenomenal ego. It has social correlates as well as neural correlates. That is pretty much what I've started out with. And to explain a little bit, he starts off the chapter by talking about or observing what a toddler does. If you observe little children, you can see the sort of social correlates that are working by observing them. For instance, when they fall, they will fall, and then the next thing they do is they look towards their mother or whoever their caretaker is to sort of find out how they're supposed to react now. And depending on how the mother or caretaker reacts, they react as well. So part of their self-model, to put it to this example, so how much pain am I supposed to sense, or how upset am I supposed to be when this or that happens? He actually takes from watching, his or her caretaker and how they react. So they sort of learn part of the image of themselves, part of the sense of self is created by observing others. Also, there are kinds of self-experience that an isolated being could never have. Further, we have ego tunnels develop in a social environment, and the nature of this environment determines to what extent one ego tunnel can resonate with other ego tunnels. The self-model theory holds that certain new layers of consciousness unique to the self-model of Homo sapiens made the transition from biological to cultural evolution possible. Now, when we talk about any kind of culture, the question that co-emerges is what kind of self-model we need in order to become moral agents, in order for culture to work. One would assume that there needs to be some kind of morality. And he says the answer could have to do with the progression from a mental representation of the first person singular perspective to that of the first person plural, along with the ability to represent mentally what the benefits or risks of a particular action would be for the collective as a whole. And in that sense, the mirror neurons supposedly help us in achieving that kind of moral agency. Further, he says, recall that the beautiful early philosophical theories of consciousness as conscience rested on installing an ideal observer in your mind. I believe the human self-model was successful because it installed your social group as an ideal observer in your mind, and to a much stronger degree than was the case in any other primate brain. So, in an attempt to merge social and biological explanations for human consciousness, we now look more closely to the function of mirror neurons and canonical neurons, and what they do and how they allow the self-model to develop further. We can start with canonical neurons. So this is a set of neurons in our brains that can code body movements. So this happens unconsciously. You could say that over time your brain develops a sort of motor vocabulary. This vocabulary is a set of learned actions that are represented as relationships between you, the agent, and the target objective of the action of such agents. So, for instance, if we look for an example, we could call such an action reach, for example, so which entails your stretching out your arm and your hand in order to reach a piece of fruit or something of that sort. So what happens is that your brain apparently stores the experience of reaching, which is a set of motor movements, as that total of motor movements. And the idea also is that you can use this type of action for different purposes. So he writes, by developing an inner vocabulary for possible actions, we reduce the immense space of possibilities to a small number of stereotypical body movements. This allows us, for instance, to perform the same grasping movement in widely differing situations. Also, one of the most fascinating features of these so-called canonical neurons is that they also respond to the visual perception of objects in our environment. Now, I want to offer you a quick definition of canonical neurons. Canonical neurons are a type of neuron that encode a set of basic functions which can be combined to represent more complex functions or patterns. This concept is often used in the context of artificial neural networks and computational neuroscience to describe neurons that serve as a fundamental building block for the processing of information. He now goes further into exploring action. As it turns out, the traditional philosophical distinction between perception and action is an artificial one. In reality, our brains employ a common coding. Everything we perceive is automatically portrayed as a factor in a possible interaction between ourselves and the world. The second fascinating discovery about canonical neurons is that you also use them for self-representation. So, if you want to dumb all of this down, you could say that firstly, by the act of perceiving something, you at the same time construct the model of a self that is doing the perceiving, and when it comes to that sense of self who is perceiving, supposedly, when it comes to that self turning into an agent and performing actions, it's really hard to make a distinction between the perceiving, the perception, and the action, because it's almost like your brain sort of co-codes the action with the perception, so to speak. We can now turn to the topic of mirror neurons, and I'm going to give you a quick definition of mirror neurons here as well. Mirror neurons are a type of brain cell that respond both when an individual performs an action and when they observe someone else performing that same action. They were first discovered in the 1990s in the premortal cortex of macaque monkeys. Mirror neurons are thought to play a key role in understanding the actions and intentions of others, as well as in the development of empathy and social skills. They may also be important for imitation, learning through observation, and the development of language. And he doubles down on the importance of our brains performing this kind of matching between observation and action, when he says this action observation matching system helps us understand something we could never understand using our sensory organs alone, and that is that other beings in our environment pursue goals, or we should say pursue goals as well. Our ability to recognize a particular feeling in another human being can be weakened or switched off by blocking the relevant parts of the mirror neuron system. So, apparently, the mirror neuron system can be switched off or even also compromised, in humans, so that they are not able to recognize feelings in other people so well. So that brings me to the question of whether this might have something to do with the genesis of autism, and apparently whether deficits in mirror neuron systems could be one of the causes of autism has been the topic of research, but the evidence is mixed. So there has been something called the broken mirror hypothesis, which proposed that a dysfunctional mirror neuron system might underline some of the, especially the social and communication difficulties that we can observe in people with autism spectrum disorder. While early studies suggested that autistic people might have impairments in their mirror neuron systems, subsequent research has produced mixed results. So some of the studies conducted have found atypical activity with regions that are associated with mirror neurons in individuals with autism, but others have not. So, and I think the takeaway is that autism is in itself such a highly heterogeneous condition in that it presents differently and such variations of symptoms and severity between individuals that it is very challenging to pinpoint a particular neural correlate and autism spectrum disorder. What researchers now seem to understand is that autism likely involves the malfunctioning of broader neural network systems, so they are not just limited to mirror neurons systems. So it is assumed that areas associated with social cognition, the capability for theory of mind, and also broader communication networks might be implicated in individuals with autism. We can close the discussion of this chapter by revisiting the probable evolution of the self-model and its overall significance in the evolution of humans. Metzinger writes, first we developed the self-model because we had to integrate our sensory perceptions with our bodily behavior. Then the self-model became conscious and the phenomenal self-model was born into the ego tunnel, allowing us to achieve global control of our bodies in a much more selective and flexible manner. And the next evolutionary step was embodied simulation. In order to understand the feelings and goals of other human beings, we use our own body model in the brain to simulate them. And we can sum up our sort of current condition with regards to the workings of our self-model in the following way. We are all constantly swimming in an unconscious sea of intercorporality, permanently mirroring one another with the aid of various unconscious components and precursors of the phenomenal ego. So with that, I hope this has brought some enlightenment for you. Next week we will get into the third part of Metzinger's book, where we will start to explore the aspects of artificial intelligence in the context of his self-model theory. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.